Sinan, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do this interview this year again. Following the developments in Syria, we're witnessing a new role for Turkey in the Middle East region as a whole. First of all, is the US on the same line with Turkey for the day after in the country? And what does it mean for the Kurdish populations?
Good questions, and happy to be back with you. I think the answer to those questions is we don't know. I think it was a shock for the world when we found out that the Syrian regime, the Assad regime, just was overthrown in a matter of hours, if not days. And that was during the Biden administration. So, it was the last days of the Biden administration. We basically had to figure out what the US response was going to be. Then we saw the European Union and European powers trying to sort of decide what to do with this, and we've seen sort of high-level delegations, and if not Shura now being sort of socialized into the Arab world, but also the European leadership world, just to sort of see what can be made of this. But then the transition to the Trump administration here in Washington, again, we don't know what this is, but one of the things that, that we subsequently found out, and the Turks haven't really tried to hide this, is that none of this could have happened without the direct support of Turkey's President Erdogan and the Turkish government support to overthrow the Assad regime. They've been very sort of lukewarm in terms of denying this. As we saw when Aleppo fell, we saw Turkish flags hung down over the walls of the old city walls of Aleppo by HTS fighters. And so it really has sort of become a situation whereby in non-official circles, but in public domains, people are saying essentially Turkey now governs Syria. We see widespread usage of Turkish currency across the country. We know that HTS and Shura support and have the support and ongoing offers of support to train the Shura government and the Shura-led military. And so what do they want to do with that? We have no idea. My personal view is that essentially that this is continuing sort of a budding of Turkish flexing of its muscle, its regional attempts to sort of dominate the space. This event that we just had, we called it sort of the New Ottoman space, New Ottoman resurgence. I think Turkey wants to see itself as a major dominant power where it sees the Arab world follow its lead in terms of regional dynamics, whereby Turkey is, the controlling sort of entity. You can say the similar sort of sentiments about the Eastern Mediterranean also. As far as the Kurds, that's a problem. We don't know what the Trump administration's perspective is. We know that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is very supportive of the Kurds in the region, not because the United States under Rubio or Trump or Biden and previous administrations have a natural affinity towards the Kurds, but they fear destabilization in Syria, but also a major resurgence of the Islamic State, ISIS fighters. Secretary of State Rubio has basically said that's why they would want the troops in there. Turkey's pressuring them to move moved out. What we don't know is what President Trump will say and where he will lean on this.
Yeah, maybe it's too early to call on that, but you said about Turkey presenting itself as a key regional player. In a way, Turkey is trying to balance relationships with the West, with Russia and the Middle East. How sustainable is this balancing act? Meaning, how long can Turkey play this role, balancing the power with all the major players?
I see it slightly differently. I don't necessarily see Turkey as balancing its relationships with different powers. What I see is what Erdogan is doing is assessing the weaknesses and the differences in different regional and global powers that have an interest in the region. So Erdogan looks to what the Russians need and what the Russians want, and how that differs from essentially what the United States may want or not. And depending on where he finds weakness, he moves in to assert his control. So we do know the Russians, for example, want to maintain their bases to the extent that they can inside of Russia, as well as their naval base. So I think Erdogan will want to facilitate that to the extent that he can get Russian cooperation and support for possibly if Turkey would like to move upon pressuring the SDF out of being a unified military, right? As far as the United States was caught unaware of this. The Israelis were caught unaware of, Assad's downfall, and that was Turkish moves to topple Assad. So right now, Erdogan is trying to assess whether Trump will essentially agree with Turkey and move US troops out of Syria? And then will that give him a green light to essentially work with the Syrian government, the interim government, to pressure the SDF to disband, if not altogether militarily try to eradicate them? As far as Europeans are concerned, European interests, I think Erdogan calculates a major weakness on part of the Europeans, which is Brussels only seems to be concerned about what can Turkey do to prevent refugee flows into Europe. I'm being slightly unfair. They might have a tangential interest to say that Europe has an interest in the non-resurgence of ISIS, but they're not really making that clear and assertive. So Erdogan's in a very dominant position in terms of trying to assess where Turkey's interests lie and how he can essentially dominate each individual actor as far as they have an interest in the region, and how he can balance those. But he sees everybody else following Turkey's lead, and he sees himself in a dominant position.
To that end, do you sense that Erdogan is now, and Turkey is now, an asset or a liability for NATO?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I think NATO has been ambivalent about what Turkey stands for quite some time, and we saw this with NATO's expansion. I think right now NATO's position would be, let's not antagonize Turkey in a way that really gets it to work against our interests. So we see a lot of supportive messages coming out by the new Secretary General. He's visited Ankara, he's talked with Erdogan. But on the other hand, we see, Turkey has been a major conduit for ongoing sort of Russian money being laundered or filtered out of Russia, circumventing Western sanctions against Russia, thereby helping to enable Russia's war against Ukraine and thereby threatening NATO as well as Europe. They're aware of this, but in that particular instance of allowing Russian monies to flow out through Turkey, there's been no response either by the Washington or NATO countries as a whole, because again, I don't think they want to antagonize Turkey. I think they're willing to turn a blind eye as long as Turkey still maintains some sort of adherence to NATO policies such as control of the straits, restriction of airspace to Russian aircraft. But I think on the whole, NATO has ideational sort of crisis in its mindset, is what to do with a member, a nearly founding member of NATO since 1952. What do you do with a member that is not 100% on board with our values, our threat perceptions? I don't think they have an answer to that.
Nobody does, I guess. How much of Erdogan's foreign policy reflects on his domestic aspirations? And is he vulnerable at home or not?
I think he's very vulnerable at home. I know he projects a strong image, and that's because he controls the media, he controls all the airwaves. He's very, he has control of the parliament, he has control of the presidency, he has control of institutions, the media. So he, on the outwardly, he's very strong. But I also think that overshadows a deep vulnerability on the side, which is he fears constantly that he's going to be overthrown. I mean, the Turkish economy is so weak right now. They were the top three, highest inflation-ridden countries in the world, which was Argentina, Venezuela, and Turkey. Argentina seems to have stepped back off the cliff's edge, whereas Venezuela and Turkey are still very, very weak and vulnerable. But they have been for some time. But the problem for Erdogan is the public are fed up. Mm-hmm. They blame Erdogan. There's increasing pressure against Erdogan, which is trying to lead Erdogan to calculate, when he should hold early elections again to see if he can renew a mandate to govern, because he fears that there's this rising tide of public pressure against him. How does that relate to his foreign policy? Well, it relates to him because foreign policy has been essentially an arena where he has used his presence on the world stage as a means of distracting Turkish voters away from economic realities at home. That has worked up until now. So basically, for example, after the October 7 attacks in Israel, Erdogan went full force in support of Hamas in terms of, to the detriment of Israel. And for a time it seemed to work, but as the economic conditions have worsened, people have kind of turned off to that message, right? I mean, people have just stopped caring. People are looking now saying, what are you going to do to resolve this economic crisis? And there doesn't seem to be an answer. And I don't think foreign relations are going to cause anything, is going to solve anything for Erdogan. Mm-hmm. But typically, foreign policy is has been a means for him to distract and deflect.
A couple more questions. One is, do you sense that the easing of relations with Greece, is that sustainable? Is that, in a sense, a decision that there's so much focus on the east of Turkey that there's no reason for any meddling with the waters with Greece?
So, deconfliction and de-escalation, Erdogan has kind of adhered to up till now, but I think I think there's a reasonable fear inside of the Greek government that Erdogan may re-escalate once again, and they've held several levels of talks with the Greek government, and Greek officials and Turkish officials have talked about. But as I understand it, nothing of substance has been talked about. But on top of that, what we've also seen is continued naval buildup of Turkish naval assets. We've seen Turkish maneuvers to essentially shore up relations with forward basing in places like Somalia and the Horn of Africa. We have also seen Erdogan acquire, or Turkish private sector acquire, major Italian subsidiary arms manufacturer Piaggio, which also is a manufacturer of the F-35 components. So there's a worry in Greece that that Turkey may have access to essentially F-35 secrets, and what it does with them, we don't know. But obviously, I also think that Erdogan can re-escalate tensions with Greece at a time and means of his choosing, should he feel that's to his interest again. Because since this de-escalation began over a year ago, I have seen nothing of substance to move on, serious issues of, bilateral differences, to talk about, to resolve serious issues.
And on the Cyprus front, any ideas or any interest in resolving the issue?
No. Yeah, again, I would say...
Being engaged in any kind of negotiations?
No, I think that, Erdogan would use that to his advantage of increasing tension, suggesting things like we can come in the middle of the night, which he's said before. I don't think he's ever going to get serious about essentially trying to sort of seriously address a serious dialogue in terms of a resolution towards the Cyprus question.
And finally, Sinan, I read you wrote something about a potential for Turkey to develop nuclear technology. What would be the motives of such a move?
So Turkey has signed an initial agreement with the government of Niger, the interim government of Niger, for mining of uranium. And that's quite strange for us to sort of see, mainly because Turkey has a nuclear power plant being built by the Russians, which is 100% owned by the Russians and going to be fueled and maintained by the Russians for the next 60 years. There is no reason for Turkey to start acquiring or sourcing uranium for fuel needs, because again, as I said, that's Russian supplied. And the suspicion may be that essentially Turkey is looking to acquire and develop nuclear weapons capability. Erdogan is on record as saying back in 2019 that he is sorry that Turkey signed up to the NP Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that he doesn't find it acceptable that countries such as Israel, the United States, and other Western countries are allowed to develop nuclear weapons, but Turkey is not. So there is a worry that Erdogan would want to develop that, and the immediate precursor, I think, that he's interested in developing nuclear weapons, because if he's seeking regional dominance, one of the avenues to buy safety and guarantee against would-be aggressors would be nuclear weapons, and his primary target would be, I think, at this point, to have safeguards against Iran, simply because Erdogan has built up a lot of resentment inside of Iran with helping to overthrow the Iranian puppet and proxy, Bashar al-Assad, and also helped undermine Hezbollah as well as Hamas. So, to the extent that Iran is weakened and Erdogan has regional dominance aspirations, Erdogan would wish to essentially possibly invest in nuclear weapons capability. We don't know if this is going to go this way yet, but I think there are sort of breadcrumbs being laid out on the front. And unless we are proven otherwise, I think we should take it seriously.
Thank you very much, Sinan, for being with Air tonight.
Thank you.